Omega Seamstress sewed the Alpha's wedding dress, not knowing she was the real bride. When Aelira placed the final stitch into the wedding gown, she saw blood on her fingertip, a tiny drop, red against pale skin. She pulled her hand back so fast, the silver needle slipped from her grasp and struck the stone floor with a sound that seemed far too loud in the silent sewing room. Tick. Then nothing. The gown did not move, hung from the carved cedar frame in the center of the room, moon white and breathless, as if it were not made of silk and thread, but of winter light, old promises, and the kind of hope that could ruin an Omega if she held it too close. Aelira stared at it for a long moment. The neckline was soft and elegant, shaped to rest just above the collarbones. The sleeves were sheer, embroidered with silver vines, so fine they looked like frost forming on glass. Along the waist, she had sewn tiny pearl moons, each one no larger than a tear. The skirt fell in layered waves, weightless and solemn, meant to move like mist when the bride walked, was the most beautiful thing Aelira had ever made. And it hurt to look at. Because she had made it for another woman. Because in 3 nights, Duchess Isolde Veyrath would marry a bride whose name the palace refused to speak. Because every servant, guard, noblewoman, court Omega in Frostmere Keep had whispered about the wedding for weeks, wondering who could possibly stand beside the most feared Alpha in the Northern Territories. A woman brave enough to hold Isolde's hand, a woman strong enough not to tremble beneath her gaze. A woman precious enough to be chosen by the Alpha who had rejected alliances, queens, heiresses, generals, priestesses, and every decorated daughter of every ancient bloodline. Aelira had heard the whispers. She had also heard the laughter. Not cruel at first, only careless. The kind that followed Omega servants as naturally as dust. Followed old curtains. Say the bride is from the south. No, from the mountain packs. I heard she is a golden Alpha princess. I heard she is an Omega noble with a scent like roses. Imagine being chosen by Duchess Veyrath. Imagine being touched by her. Imagine surviving it. Aelira had bent over her work and pretended not to hear. That was what she did best. She pretended not to hear, pretended not to notice. When the head seamstress looked through her, as if she were furniture, she pretended not to flinch. When noble Omegas lifted their hems away from her, afraid the dust of the workroom might cling to their silk slippers, she pretended not to care. When Alpha courtiers passed by the sewing chamber and wrinkled their noses at her faint scent. Too soft, they said, too quiet, barely there. A scent like rain on old linen, a scent that disappeared unless someone cared enough to come close. No one cared enough. No one, except one woman. And Aelira could not allow herself to think of that, turned from the gown, and pressed her bleeding finger into a scrap of cloth. The sewing room was colder than usual tonight. The tall windows were rimmed with frost, and beyond them, the northern sky stretched black and endless. Above the keep, snow fell, silently over the courtyard below. The statues, the rows, arches, the frozen fountain, training yard where Alpha guards drilled every morning before dawn. Frostmere Keep never truly slept. It waited. It listened. It remembered Aelira. It had lived inside its walls for 4 years, long enough to know which stairways squeaked, which fireplaces smoked, which noblewomen lied with smiles, and which servants cried in the laundry room when no one was supposed to hear them. She knew where to stand so no one noticed her. She knew how to lower her eyes without looking afraid. She knew how to answer, "Yes, my lady," in a voice that could not be accused of pride. To survive. And survival, for an unclaimed Omega with no family name worth speaking of, was an art sharper than any needle. A knock came at the door. Aelira stiffened. It was past midnight. Head Seamstress had gone to bed hours ago after warning Aelira that if the hem was not perfect by morning, she would be sent back to laundry duty. Aelira had not answered. She had simply bowed her head and kept sewing. The knock came again, not impatient, not weak. 2 slow taps. Aelira's heartbeat changed. She knew that knock. Everyone in the keep knew it, even if they had only heard it once. Duchess Isolde Veyrath did not need to pound on doors. The world opened for her before she asked. Aelira wiped her finger quickly, hid the stained cloth beneath a pile of lace, and moved toward the door. Her knees felt unsteady. Though she hated herself for it, she opened the door. Cold entered first. Then the Alpha, Isolde, stood in the corridor wearing black riding leathers beneath a long, gray coat dusted with snow. Her dark hair was braided back from her face, severe and shining. A faint scar crossed one brow, pale against her brown skin. Eyes were silver gray, the color of a lake before a storm. She was taller than Aelira by nearly a head, still as a blade, beautiful in a way that made the body cautious before the heart could be foolish. Aelira dropped into a bow. "My lady." "Do not bow so low," Isolde said. Aelira froze halfway down. The Duchess's voice was low, quiet, and absolute. It had the strange effect of filling a room without rising. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Aelira straightened slowly. "I am sorry, Duchess. You apologize too often." "I am sorry." One of Isolde's eyebrows lifted. Heat rose in Aelira's cheeks. She looked down at her own hands. Isolde stepped into the room, and the door closed behind her with a soft click. The air changed at once. It always did when an Alpha entered, Vice, but with Isolde, it was different. Other Alphas carried their power like perfume, heavy and deliberate, meant to overwhelm. Isolde's dominance did not announce itself. It arrived like winter at the window, present, silent, impossible to ignore. Aelira's Omega instincts stirred, not with panic, but with a trembling awareness she had spent months trying to bury. Duchess smelled like cedar smoke, cold iron, and the first snow before dawn. Aelira had never known. A scent could feel like protection and danger at the same time. Isolde's gaze moved to the gown. For a moment, he said nothing. Aelira held her breath. This was the part that mattered, not the sleepless nights, not the needle wounds, not the ache in her shoulders or the blur in her eyes. This moment. The Alpha stepped closer to the gown. Her gloved fingers did not touch it. She only looked. Aelira watched Isolde's face for some sign of approval. The Duchess had the kind of expression that armies probably saw before surrendering. At last, Isolde said, "You changed the sleeves." Aelira's stomach dropped. "Yes, my lady. I asked for plain sleeves." "Yes, my lady." "Why?" Aelira opened her mouth. No sound came, because the truth was too strange. Because she had spent so many hours with the gown that it had stopped feeling like an assignment. It had begun to feel like a secret. The plain sleeves had looked wrong, too cold, too empty. The dress for display, and not for a woman with living skin and a beating heart. So Aelira had changed them. She had embroidered vines on the sleeves because the bride, whoever she was, would need something soft around her arms when the whole court looked at her. She had sewn frost into the silk, but also blooming thorns. A warning, a prayer. Aelira swallowed. The gown needed a little tenderness. The silence afterward was sharp. Aelira realized what she had said and lowered her head quickly. "Forgive me. I meant no insult. To the gown? To you." Isolde looked at her. Aelira could feel it like warmth near her skin. Why would tenderness insult me? Because no one used that word near Duchess Veyrath. Because tenderness belonged to Omegas who were treasured. To lovers behind closed doors. To mothers in old songs. To healers. To brides' ends, too. were kissed on the forehead before sleep. Not to the butcher of Grey Pass, Fonda. Not to the Alpha who had ended a border war before her 26th winter, to the Duchess who once stood alone before 6 rebel pack leaders and made all 6 kneel without lifting a sword. Not to the woman whose own counsel flinched as when she removed her gloves. Aelira said none of that. Instead, she whispered, "I do not know." Isolde's gaze remained on her for another heartbeat. Then she looked back to the gown. "It is better this way." Aelira blinked. "My lady?" "Sleeves," Isolde said. "You were right." No one had ever told Aelira she was right in that tone, as if it was not kindness, as if it was fact. Throat tightened unexpectedly. "Thank you." Isolde noticed the movement. Of course she did. The Duchess noticed everything. "Your finger." Aelira pulled her hand behind her back. "It is nothing. Show me." "My lady, truly, it is only a needle prick. Show me." The second command was no louder than the first, but Aelira obeyed before she thought better of it. She raised her hand. Isolde removed one glove. The sight of her bare hand should not have affected Aelira. It was only a hand. Strong, elegant, scarred faintly across the knuckles. But something inside Aelira went very still when the Alpha took her wrist. Not tightly. Not possessively. Carefully. Aelira were something that could be hurt. The Duchess examined the tiny puncture on her fingertip. "You have worked too long. Gown must be ready." "It is ready. The hem still needs pressing." "The hem can wait." Lady Maravan said it must be completed by dawn. Isolde's jaw shifted. It was barely a movement. Aelira still saw it. "Lady Maravan is not the mistress of this keep." Aelira went silent. Lady Maravan Thorne was the mistress of nearly every room she entered, whether she owned it or not. She was the chief wedding steward, a high-born Omega from an old northern family, elegant as a swan and twice as vicious. She had been placed in charge of the ceremony by the council. She hated mistakes. She hated servants. And most of all, she hated low-born Omegas who forgot their place. Isolde released Aelira's wrist, not, before pressing a folded handkerchief into her palm. It was dark grey silk, embroidered with the Veyrath crest in black thread. Aelira stared at it. "I cannot take this. You can. It is yours." "I know. I might stain it. You are bleeding." "That is why I might stain it." The first time, something changed in Isolde's face. Not quite a smile, but close enough that Aelira's heart stumbled. "Then stain it." Aelira looked up before she could stop herself. Their eyes met. The world narrowed. There were no gowns, no frost, no court waiting for a wedding, no whispers in corridors, no heads seamstress, no Lady Maravan, no invisible rules pressing their hands around Aelira's throat, the Alpha's fingers brushing hers as the handkerchief passed from one palm to another. Only the scent of cedar smoke. Only the terrible, fragile knowledge that Aelira wanted something she had no right to want. Then, Isolde stepped back. The room became cold again. "You will sleep tonight," the Duchess said. Aelira clutched the handkerchief. "I have work." "You will sleep. My lady cannot simply abandon the gown." Isolde looked at the wedding dress, then at Aelira. "No," she said softly. "You cannot." Aelira did not understand why those words sounded almost sad. Before she could ask, the door opened. Lady Maravan entered without knocking, dressed in pale blue silk. Her white blonde hair falling in perfect waves over one shoulder. She had the kind of beauty that was polished until nothing human remained. Behind her stood 2 assistant stewards, both Omegas, both silent, both watching Aelira with the nervous hunger of women grateful not to be the target. Maravan's eyes flicked from the Duchess to Aelira, then to the handkerchief in Aelira's hand. A smile appeared, small. "Poisonous." "Duchess," Maravan said, lowering into a graceful curtsy. "I did not realize you were inspecting the gown tonight." I was. How fortunate. Then you have seen the seamstress's alterations. Aelira's skin went cold. Isolde said nothing. Maravin drifted closer to the gown and touched one sheer sleeve with 2 fingers, specifically ordered plain sleeves. She ignored instruction. Aelira lowered her eyes. I apologize, Lady Maravin, I thought. I did not ask what you thought. The words cut cleanly. Aelira stopped speaking. Maravin smiled wider. That is the difficulty with Omegas raised without proper training. Give them thread and a warm room, and they begin to mistake themselves for artists. The assistant stewards looked away. Aelira kept her gaze fixed on the floor. Do not react. Do not tremble. Do not give her the satisfaction. Maravin turned to Isolde. Of course, the damage can be corrected. I will assign a senior seamstress to remove the embellishments. No, the word landed like a door closing. Maravin paused. Isolde stood near the window, now one bare hand at her side, the other still gloved. The sleeves remain, the Duchess said. Maravin's smile tightened. As you wish, though I only worry the bride may find them. Sentimental. Isolde's eyes moved to her. Bride will wear what I choose. Aelira felt the sentence in her bones. Maravin bowed her head. Of course. But her gaze slid back to Aelira. There it was. The promise. Later. Aelira knew that look. It had followed her in kitchens, laundries, stables, orphan dormitories, sewing halls. Meant punishment delayed was not punishment forgotten. Maravin moved toward the table where Aelira's sketches lay spread beneath a pair of shears. You made drawings? Aelira stepped forward without meaning to. They are only drafts. Maravin picked one up. It was not part of the official gown. It was something Aelira had drawn during the second night, when the moon was high and her mind had wandered. A different version of the dress, softer at the waist, lower at the back, embroidered not with the Veyrath crest, but with tiny white moths rising from the hem, gown for someone who had survived darkness but still moved toward light. A gown Aelira had imagined for no one, or perhaps for herself, in a life that had never existed. Maravin studied it. How sweet. Aelira's hands curled. Please give that back. Maravin looked amused. Please? Aelira realized her mistake. Forgive me. Lady Maravin, may I have it back? Why? Planning your own wedding. The assistant stewards laughed softly. Aelira's face burned. No, of course not. Maravin tilted the paper toward the candlelight. Who would marry you? The question was gentle. That made it worse. Aelira could endure shouting. Shouting was weather. It passed, but gentleness used as a knife entered deeper. Maravin continued. No family, no dowry, no title. Barely a cent. Seamstress Omega, with needle scars and ink on her cuffs. Her eyes lifted. What bride could you ever be? The room became very quiet. Aelira's breath stuck. She told herself not to look at Isolde. She looked. Anyway, the Duchess had gone utterly still. Maravin did not notice at first. She was still smiling at Aelira, still holding the sketch like it was something dirty. Then, the temperature in the room seemed to fall, not physically. Worse. Every Omega instinct in Aelira's body recognized the shift before her mind did. Alpha displeasure. Controlled, leshed, deadly. One of the assistant stewards took a step back. Maravin finally turned. Isolde was looking at her hand, the one holding Aelira's drawing. Put it down, Isolde said. Maravin's smile flickered. Duchess? Now. Maravin placed the sketch on the table, carefully. Aelira did not breathe until the paper was no longer in her hand. Isolde walked toward Maravin. Not fast, not dramatically. Each step was quiet. Maravin held her ground, but her scent sharpened with unease. My lady, I meant no disrespect. To whom? Maravin blinked. To you, of course. That was not my question. Aelira's pulse pounded in her ears. Maravin's gaze darted at her, then away. To the seamstress, she said finally. Aelira had never heard her say the word as if it might matter. Isolde stopped beside the table. Her name is Aelira. The sound of her name in the Duchess's mouth did something terrible to Aelira's chest. Maravin's face went pale around the lips. Yes, Duchess, you will use it. Yes, Duchess, you will not speak to her that way again. Maravin bowed. No, Duchess. Isolde picked up Aelira's sketch. For one horrifying moment, Aelira thought she might tear it apart. Or ask why Aelira had drawn it. Or see, somehow, the hidden hunger in every line. Instead, Isolde folded it once and held it out to her. Aelira stepped forward on unsteady legs and took it. Their fingers did not touch this time. Somehow that hurt more. Isolde turned back to Maravin. Leave. Mercivan curtsied so low it looked painful. Of course. She left with her assistants. Door closed. Aelira and Isolde were alone again. But everything was different now. The room felt too small. Aelira held the folded sketch against her chest. You should not have done that, she whispered. Isolde's eyes narrowed slightly. No? She will hate me more now. She already hated you. Aelira laughed, once breathless and bitter. That is not comforting. It was not meant to be. Aelira looked down. I survive because women like Lady Maravin forget me when they are finished being cruel. If they remember me, it becomes worse. Isolde said nothing. Aelira wished she could stop. She could not. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the way Isolde had said her name. Maybe it was unbearable the beauty of the gown. I know my place, Duchess. I know what I am allowed to be. I know how much space to take up in a room. I know when to speak and when to swallow words until they taste like blood. I know that if someone like her humiliates me, everyone will pretend they did not hear. That is the rule. That is how this place works. Her voice shook. She hated it. Isolde watched her with an expression Aelira could not read. And what do you want me to do? The Alpha asked. Aelira closed her eyes. Nothing. Everything. Touch my hand again. Tell me I am not foolish. Tell me there is a room somewhere in this keep where I would not have to disappear to be safe. Tell me you are not marrying someone else. Instead, she said, forget this conversation. Isolde's gaze darkened. I do not forget what matters. Aelira opened her eyes. For a moment, something passed between them. A thread pulled too tight. Then from somewhere far below, the chapel bell struck one. The sound broke the room apart. Isolde stepped away first. You will lock the door after I leave. Yes, Duchess. You will sleep. Aelira almost smiled. Are those separate commands? Yes. Then yes, Duchess. Isolde paused at the door. Her hand rested on the latch. Without turning around, she said, the gown is not for Maravin. Aelira blinked. I know. No, Isolde said. Do not. Then she left. Aelira stood alone in the sewing room, the grey handkerchief in one hand, the folded sketch in the other, the wedding gown shining beside her, like a secret the whole world knew. Except her. She did not sleep. Of course she did not. By morning, the entire keep had heard that Duchess Veyrath had defended a seamstress. By noon, the story had changed. By evening, Aelira had become a schemer, flirt, a shameless little omega who had somehow caught the Duchess alone and tried to gain favor before the wedding. Aelira learned this from the kitchen maids, who stopped talking when she entered. From the laundry girls who stared at her hands, from the head seamstress who struck her across the cheek with a measuring cord and told her not to bring disgrace upon the workroom. Cord did not break skin. It only left a red line. Aelira was grateful. Gratitude for small violences was one of the ugliest skills poverty taught. She spent the day in silence, pressing the gown, cleaning loose, threads, adjusting the pearl moons at the waist. Lady Maravin did not visit the sewing room. That frightened Aelira more than any insult would have. Women like Maravan did not retreat. They arranged, sharpened. They waited until the audience was large enough. On the second night before the wedding, Aelira was summoned to the Hall of Mirrors. A message came from one of Maravan's assistants, an Omega named Sorini, with nervous eyes and a voice too soft to carry guilt. Lady Maravan requires the gown for final inspection. Aelira stood from her stool. The gown should not be moved without the Duchess's approval. Sorin swallowed. She said the council approved it. That meant nothing. Or worse, it meant too much. Aelira looked at the gown. Every instinct warned her not to let it leave her sight. But refusing a direct summons from the wedding steward would mean punishment, not the dramatic kind. No chains, no dungeon. Nothing that would make a good song, just dismissal, and an Omega seemed dismissed from a ducal keep. During winter did not need chains to die. Aelira wrapped the gown in protective linen with help from 2 junior seamstresses. Together they carried it through the long east corridor, down the marble stairs, across the gallery of old portraits, and into the Hall of Mirrors. Voice. The hall had been prepared for the pre-wedding presentation. A ridiculous tradition, in Aelira's opinion, though she would never say it aloud before any high wedding. The bridal garments were displayed for the council, the court, and honored guests to inspect. Not the bride herself, never the bride. That would be considered unlucky. Instead, everyone else was invited to judge the fabric, the cut, the symbolism, the wealth, the obedience of the house. Aelira had always thought it sounded less like a blessing and more like a warning. Tonight, the Hall of Mirrors glittered with candlelight. Tall silver mirrors lined the walls, multiplying every face into 100 watching versions. Noblewomen stood in clusters, dressed in velvet and jewels, their scents blending into a thick cloud of perfume. Alpha musk, Omega sweetness, political hunger. There were no men in Frostmere's court. There had never been. The northern packs were ruled by women, inherited by women, defended by women, and destroyed by women when necessary. That did not make them gentle. Cruelty did not need a male voice. It lived just as easily behind painted lips and pearl earrings. Aelira entered with the gown and felt the room notice her. Not openly. That would be too honest. The attention arrived like needles beneath her skin. Lady Maravan stood near the dais, wearing a silver gown that almost looked bridal. Almost. Her hair was braided with diamonds. Her smile was calm, was how Aelira knew something terrible had already begun. "Set here," Maravan said. Aelira and the others lifted the gown onto the display frame. The linen covering was removed. The hall fell quiet. For one shining heartbeat, even the cruelest faces softened. The gown commanded silence. Aelira saw it happen and felt a small, aching pride open inside her. Then Lady Maravan clapped once. "Exquisite work," she said. "Eh?" Aelira kept her head down. "Of course, the design was approved by the council, guided by myself, and executed by the sewing staff." The pride closed. Aelira had expected that. Work belonged to the hands that did it only until someone powerful wanted credit. Maravan turned toward the room. "However, before we offer final approval, there is a matter of concern." Aelira's stomach tightened. Here it was. Maravan gestured. A servant stepped forward, carrying a small silver tray. On it lay a torn strip of white silk. Aelira stared. She knew that silk. It was from the inner lining of the gown. The place no one would see unless they searched. Maravan lifted the torn strip delicately. This was found in the seamstress's workbasket. A murmur moved through the hall. Aelira shook her head. "No." Maravan looked at her. "No?" Aelira forgot to bow. "I did not tear the gown." "Then, why was damaged bridal silk hidden among your things?" "It was not hidden by me." A few nobles laughed. Maravin's expression saddened, which somehow made her uglier. Aelira, I had hoped not to do this publicly. Liar, you are gifted, Maravin continued. No one denies that. But ambition in an Omega without guidance can become dangerous. Aelira's pulse roared. I did not damage the gown. Maravin lowered her voice, just enough to sound merciful. Perhaps you wanted to make yourself necessary. Perhaps after receiving unusual attention from the Duchess. You feared your place would vanish once the wedding was complete. The murmurs grew. Aelira felt them pressing closer. Attention from the Duchess. Her place. A seamstress Omega. A desperate girl. Aelira looked around the hall, searching for one face that did not already believe the worst. She found none. Sorony stood near the wall, pale and trembling. Aelira understood at once. The assistant had planted the silk, not because she wanted to, because Maravin had told her to. Everyone in the keep survived by placing pain into another woman's hands before it reached their own. Aelira should have been angry. Was too tired. Maravin held up another item, a folded paper, Aelira's sketch, the moth dress. No. Aelira stepped forward. That is mine. Yes, Maravin said. It is. She opened it for the room to see. A soft ripple of amusement spread through the nobles. Seamstress has been imagining herself as a bride. Aelira's mouth went dry. Give it back. Maravin smiled. There it is again. That tone. Aelira stopped. She had spoken too sharply. She knew it. Everyone knew it. Maravin took a step closer. Tell us, Aelira. When you drew this gown, whose wedding did you imagine? Aelira said nothing. Did you imagine yourself walking through the chapel doors? Silence. Did you imagine the Duchess waiting for you? The hall erupted in laughter. Not loud. Worse. Elegant. Controlled. Aelira stood in the middle of it and felt something is inside her begin to split. She had been hungry before, cold before, ignored before, insulted, overworked, underpaid, dismissed. But this was different. This was the taking of a secret she had never spoken, and dragging it into candlelight for amusement. This was not punishment. This was stripping. Maravin tilted her head. Poor thing. Did one kind word make you forget what you are? Aelira looked at her, and for the first time, she did not lower her eyes. The hall noticed. Maravin noticed, too. Her smile faded. Aelira's voice came out quiet. I know what I am. Maravin's nostrils flared. Then kneel and apologize for damaging the bridal gown. Aelira stared. I did not damage it. Kneel. The command did not carry alpha power. Maravin was an Omega, but authority could still bruise. Aelira looked at the gown, then at the torn silk, then at her sketch in Maravin's hand. Kneeling would end it, not truly. But for tonight, she would apologize. The room would laugh. Maravin would win. The gown would be fixed by morning. Aelira would be sent away after the wedding, maybe with a poor reference, maybe with none. She would survive if the roads were clear. She had survived worse. All she had to do was kneel, her knees bent. A voice cut through the hall. She will not. Every mirror seemed to catch the sound. The laughter died. Aelira turned. Duchess Isolde stood at the entrance of the Hall of Mirrors. She wore black. Not court black. War black. A long fitted coat with silver clasps, trousers tucked into polished boots. Her hair braided close to her scalp. No jewels except the Veyrath's signet on her left hand. Behind her stood Captain Nixera, commander of the Ducal Guard, and 3 Alpha Guardswomen in dark uniforms. Isolde's gaze moved once across the room. The entire court lowered its eyes. Even the Alphas. Aelira did not. She should have. She could not. Isolde looked at her, not at the accusation, not at the torn silk, at Aelira. Something in the Alpha's face tightened when she saw the red mark across Aelira's cheek. The room became colder than winter. Lady Maravin curtsied. Duchess. We were conducting the final inspection. I heard. Maravin's smile returned. Careful now. Then, you understand the difficulty. Your seamstress has behaved with alarming impropriety. My seamstress? Aelira's heart struck hard against her ribs. Maravin hesitated. The seamstress assigned to your wedding gown. Isolde walked forward. The crowd parted for her. No one was foolish enough to make her ask. She stopped beside Aelira, close enough that her scent wrapped around the Omega like a cloak. Aelira's body responded before her mind gave permission. Her breathing eased, her shoulders lowered. Her Omega instincts, humiliated and cornered seconds before, recognized safety. With a longing so fierce it frightened her, Isolde saw that too. Of course she did. Her jaw flexed once. Then she faced Maravin. Show me the damage. Maravin gestured to the torn strip. The piece was removed from the inner lining. From where? The left interior seam, beneath the waist panel. Isolde turned to the gown. Captain. Nyxera stepped forward. The captain was broad-shouldered, stern, and older than Isolde by at least a decade. Dark red hair was cropped at her jaw, and a scar crossed her throat. She examined the gown without touching it. No visible damage, she said. The lining is internal, Maravin replied. Nyxera looked at Aelira. May I? Aelira nodded. Captain lifted the skirt carefully and checked the inner seam. Her hands were surprisingly gentle. After a moment, she straightened. The lining is intact. Maravin's face changed, only for an instant, but everyone saw it. Isolde held out her hand, the silk. Maravin placed the torn strip into her palm. Isolde glanced at it once. This is not from the gown. Maravin recovered quickly. With respect, Duchess, the silk was found. It is not from the gown. The second time, no one dared breathe. Isolde held the strip toward Nyxera. Captain examined it. Different weave, cheaper thread, similar color. Murmurs again. Different now, uncertain, hungry. Court loved scandal. It loved reversal even more. Maravin's scent sharpened. I was misinformed. Isolde's eyes did not leave her. By whom? Silence. Sorin began to cry against the wall. Aelira turned toward her. The young Omega shook her head desperately. Maravin did not look back. Isolde did. Sorin, she said. The assistant flinched at her own name. Come here. Sorin stumbled forward and dropped into a curtsy, so deep she nearly fell. Duchess, please. Look at me. Sorin shook harder. I am sorry, Maravin snapped. Silence. Isolde's head turned slowly. Maravin went still. Alpha did not raise her voice. You do not command anyone in my presence. Maravin lowered her head. Isolde looked back at Sorin. Speak. Sorin's voice broke. Lady Maravin gave me the silk. She told me to put it in Aelira's basket. She said if I refused, my younger sister would lose her position in the kitchens. Aelira closed her eyes. There it was, the truth. Not clean, not satisfying, just another frightened Omega used as a tool by someone who knew exactly where fear lived. Maravin said, She is lying. Sorin sobbed. I am sorry. Aelira, I am so sorry. Aelira opened her eyes. Sorin expected hatred. Aelira had none left to give, only exhaustion. It is all right, she whispered. It is not, Isolde said. The words were not loud. They shook anyway. Isolde turned to Maravin, accused an innocent woman of sabotage. Maravin lifted her chin. I acted to protect your wedding. You tried to humiliate her, did what I believed necessary. You wanted her on her knees. Maravin's mouth closed. Isolde stepped closer. Why? For the first time, Maravin looked afraid. Not of punishment, of being seen. I do not understand the question. Yes, you do. Maravin's eyes flashed. Is a seamstress. Aelira felt the word like an old bruise pressed. Maravin continued, voice shaking now not with fear but fury. She is no one. You defend her before your court. You visit her workroom. You speak her name. You let rumors grow days before your wedding. Then you expect the council to pretend nothing is happening. Isolde watched her. Maravan laughed once, brittle and sharp. I think I did not understand. You think none of us understood? A nameless Omega looks at you once with wounded eyes, and suddenly the great Duchess, Veyrath, forgets duty. The hall was silent. Aelira could not move. Isolde's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes became dangerous. Maravan stepped closer, reckless now. The council chose a bride for stability. The North needs order, not some sentimental disgrace because you pitied a girl with clever hands. Aelira's ears rang. The council chose a bride. So it was true. Bride. Of course a bride. Of course there was. The ache that opened in her was so sudden, she nearly reached for the gown to steady herself. Foolish, foolish Omega. What had she imagined? That Isolde's kindness meant something? That a duchess could look at a seamstress and see a future? The wedding gown she sewed for another woman could ever be anything but proof of her place. Maravan was still speaking. Send her away before the ceremony. Let the matter end quietly. I will tell the council you acted from temporary attachment. They may still forgive. Enough. Isolde's voice was soft. The hall stopped breathing. Maravan froze. Isolde turned to Captain Nixara. Lady. Maravan Thorn is removed from all wedding duties. Her rooms are to be sealed. She will remain under guard until the council reviews her conduct. Maravan went white. You cannot do that. I can. My family may join you if they object. Maravan's composure cracked. You would ruin me for her? Isolde did not look at Aelira. Perhaps that was mercy. Perhaps it was worse. I would ruin anyone for less. Zara gestured to the guards. 2 women stepped forward. Maravan backed away, eyes bright with humiliation. Same humiliation she had tried to force into Aelira's mouth. But when the guards took her arms, Aelira did not feel victory. Only cold. Maravan's gaze found hers one last time. You still do not know, do you? Aelira's breath caught. Maravan smiled, ruined and vicious. Poor little thing. Then the guards led her away. The hall erupted into whispers the moment she disappeared. Isolde lifted one hand. Silence returned. Her gaze moved across the court. The inspection is over, no one argued. Leave, they left. Quickly, even nobles learned speed when survival required it. Soon the Hall of Mirrors stood nearly empty. Only Isolde, Aelira, Captain Nixara, the white gown remained. Sorin lingered near the doors, crying silently. Aelira turned toward her. Go rest, she said. Sorin stared. But I know, but I hurt you. Aelira's voice softened. So did many others. Go before someone decides to use your guilt against you too. Sorin broke into another sob and fled. Nixara watched her leave, then looked to Isolde. The 2 alphas exchanged something without words. Then the captain bowed once and exited, closing the doors behind her. Aelira was alone with Isolde. Again. This time, the gown stood between them like an accusation. Aelira wrapped her arms around herself. I should return to the workroom. Isolde did not move. Aelira. She hated how much she loved hearing her name that way. I should check the gown for damage. Hem may have been pulled during the presentation. The gown is unharmed. You cannot know that. I can see it. You are not a seamstress. No, Isolde said. I am not. Aelira looked down. Her cheek stung where the measuring cord had struck. She had forgotten until now. Isolde had not. Who hit you? Aelira's fingers rose to the mark. No one important. That is not an answer. It is the only one that will keep me employed. You are not going back to that workroom tonight. Aelira laughed quietly. No humor in it. Where else would I go? Isolde took one step toward her. Aelira stepped back. The movement hurt them both. She saw it in Isolde's eyes. Good, let it hurt. The Alpha feel one small edge of what she had unknowingly done. I cannot do this, Aelira said. Isolde's voice lowered. Do what? Stand near you, while everyone whispers. While your council chooses your bride, while Lady Meravin is dragged away for saying out loud what everyone else is thinking. What are they thinking? That I am a mistake. The words came out before she could stop them. The mirrors threw them back from every wall. I am a mistake. Aelira swallowed hard. Isolde's face changed. Not visibly enough for anyone else. Enough for Aelira. You are not, Isolde said. You do not get to say that. Isolde went still. Aelira felt something seem reckless rise in her chest. It had been born in the laughter of the hall, fed by exhaustion, sharpened by the sight of the wedding gown, shining for someone else. You do not get to visit me at midnight and touch my hand and say my name like matters. Then marry a bride chosen by your council while I return to the servants' stairs and pretend my heart is not stupid. Confession struck the air. Aelira's hand flew to her mouth. Too late. There it was. The secret. Not dragged out by Meravin. Given away by Aelira herself. She turned sharply toward the doors. I apologize. Forget I said that. Isolde moved. Not fast, but faster than before. Aelira. I said forget it. I will not. Aelira spun back. Then what do you want from me? The question broke. Her voice broke with it. Do you want gratitude? You have it. Do you want loyalty? You had that before you ever defended me. Do you want me quiet? I can be quiet. Been quiet my whole life. But do not ask me to stand here beside the gown I made for your bride and pretend I do not know exactly how little space there is for me in your world. Isolde stared at her. Aelira was breathing hard now. Her scent, usually faint, rose around her in waves of rain-washed linen and crushed white flowers. Vulnerable. Exposed. Uncontrolled. The Alpha inhaled once. Her eyes darkened. Aelira saw it and stepped back again. Do not. Isolde stopped immediately. That obedience nearly destroyed her. Other Alphas pushed. Isolde stopped. Aelira pressed both hands to her own chest as if she could hold herself together. Please, she whispered. I know you are not cruel. That makes this worse. If you were cruel, I could hate you. But you are kind in ways you do not even seem to understand, and I do not know what to do with that. Isolde's voice was rougher now. You think I have been kind? Aelira laughed weakly. Do not insult me by pretending you have not. I have been restrained. The words fell between them. Aelira went still. Isolde looked away first. It was the first time Aelira had ever seen the Duchess retreat from anything. I have been careful, Isolde said. Every moment, every word, every step into that workroom. Every time I wanted to ask if you had eaten. Every time I wanted to remove you from those women. And put you somewhere no one could touch you. Every time you looked at the floor, because someone taught you, Welms, the world was safer there. Aelira could not breathe. Isolde's hands curled at her sides. I have been so careful with you that I became cruel by accident. Aelira whispered, Your bride. Isolde looked back at her. The hall seemed to hold its breath with them. What bride? Isolde asked. Aelira stared. The council chose. But the wedding? Yes. Aelira's mind could not follow. Her heart had already begun to race ahead, dangerous and wild. Isolde stepped toward the gown. She did not touch it. The North requires a formal wedding before the winter conclave. The council demanded I marry for alliance. They offered names. I rejected them. All of them? Yes. Then why is there a gown? Isolde's gaze moved to her. Because I ordered one. For whom? Isolde did not answer. Not immediately. Aelira's pulse filled the silence, and the doors opened. Captain Nixara entered again, carrying a sealed black envelopes. She stopped when she saw their faces. Aelira wanted the floor to swallow her. Isolde did not look away from Aelira. Later, she said. Nixara hesitated. Council has gathered in the West Chamber. Maravin's removal reached them before we did. Lady Alicia is demanding an explanation. Isolde's expression hardened. Let her demand. She is threatening to withdraw her support for the conclave. She can freeze outside the gate. Nixara's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Aelira would have laughed on any other night. She was too busy, trying not to collapse. Nixara's gaze flicked toward the gown, then toward Aelira, and something like sympathy crossed her face. My lady, she said carefully. The announcement cannot wait much longer. Aelira looked at Isolde. Announcement? Isolde took the envelope from Nixara. The black wax seal bore the Veyrath crest. Isolde broke it. Inside was a folded sheet of thick ivory paper. She held it out to Aelira. Aelira did not take it. What is that? Read it. I should not. Read it. There was no command in the words this time, only invitation. That was worse. Aelira reached for the paper with shaking fingers. Her eyes moved over the ink to the honored houses of the Northern Territories. By decree of Duchess Isolde Veyrath of Frostmere, the wedding ceremony to be held. Beneath the winter moon shall unite House Veyrath, not to any council-appointed alliance, but to the Omega chosen by the Duchess herself. Aelira stopped reading. Her vision blurred. She forced herself onward. Brides. The bride shall be named publicly at the chapel threshold, according to old northern rite, where no council may challenge the Alpha's vow once spoken before moon, hearth, and witness. Until then, her name shall remain protected. Protected. The word opened something. Aelira looked up slowly. Isolde stood very still. Alira's voice was barely sound. Why would her name need protection? Nixara looked at Isolde. Isolde did not answer her captain. She answered Aelira, because the woman I chose has no army of relatives to shield her from my court. Aelira's hands shook harder. Because if they knew, they would hurt her before I could place my name around her. The paper trembled, because she has been taught to believe every room is safer when she is unseen. Aelira shook her head once. No, that would mean. Isolde stepped closer. This time, Aelira did not move away, because she is a seamstress with needle scars and ink on her cuffs. Aelira made a small sound. Not a sob. Not quite. Isolde's face softened in a way Aelira had never seen. And because she made a wedding gown with tenderness in the sleeves, paper slipped from Aelira's fingers. It floated to the floor between them. Aelira stared at the Alpha. You cannot mean me. I do, cannot. I can. I am no one. Isolde's eyes flashed. Do not say that. It is true. It has never been true. Aelira laughed. It broke apart. You are Duchess Veyrath. Yes. You rule Frostmere. Yes. You need alliances, armies, bloodlines. I need a bride I can trust beside me when every alliance becomes a knife. Aelira's breath hitched. Isolde continued, quieter now. I need someone who sees what others miss. Someone who changes sleeves because a gown needs tenderness. Nuances. Someone who mercy to a frightened girl who betrayed her. Someone who has been hurt and somehow did not become cruel. Aelira's eyes filled. I am not noble. No. I am not powerful. You are standing here after they tried to make you kneel. That is not power. It is the only kind that has ever impressed me. Aelira pressed a hand over her mouth. The hall of mirrors blurred around her, see herself reflected everywhere. A small Omega in a plain gray work dress. Dark curls coming loose from pins. A red mark across one cheek, tired eyes, needle-pricked fingers, and beside her, in every mirror, the Alpha, still, waiting, not taking, not claiming, waiting. Aelira lowered her hand. How long? Isolde understood. Since the winter market. Aelira's lips parted. That had been months ago. Before the gown, before the midnight visits. Before Aelira knew the Duchess could look at her without looking through her. The winter market. Aelira remembered snow, crowded stalls, cheap wool, a broken cartwheel, and a little kitchen girl crying because her basket of oranges had spilled into the slush. Everyone had stepped around the mess. Aelira had knelt to help gather them. One orange had rolled beneath a black carriage. A gloved hand had reached down and picked it up. Duchess Veyrath's hand. Aelira had barely looked at her then. Too frightened, too busy apologizing for being in the way. Isolde had placed the orange in the basket and said, "You are not in the way." Aelira had thought about that sentence for weeks. "You remembered?" she whispered. Isolde's mouth tightened. "I remembered you." Aelira's chest hurt. "Why did you not tell me?" "I intended to." "When?" After the ceremony began. Aelira stared at her. Isolde had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "It is an old rite. The Alpha names her bride at the chapel threshold. That is barbaric." Nyxara coughed into her fist. Isolde glanced at her. The captain looked away, expression blank. Aelira's shock burned into something sharper. "Going? To let me walk into that chapel not knowing? No. But the announcement says, I was going to tell you tonight." Aelira blinked. Isolde looked down at the fallen paper. "Before the council meeting, before Maravan interfered, I came to the Hall of Mirrors because I learned the gown had been moved. I had planned to take you somewhere private and ask properly. Ask, not command, not declare. Ask." Alira's anger trembled, confused by hope. What if I refused? Isolde's answer came immediately. The wedding would be cancelled. The simplicity of it undid her. Aelira wrapped her arms around herself again, but this time not to hide, keep from reaching for Isolde too soon. "You would cancel a political wedding because a seamstress said no? I would cancel any wedding where the bride did not choose me freely." Aelira closed her eyes. Freely. The word moved through her like warmth. All her life, choices had been narrow things. Which hunger to ignore, which insult to swallow, which door to avoid, which dream to bury before someone now found it and laughed. And now the most powerful Alpha in the north stood before her and offered a choice so large, frightened her more than cruelty ever had. Aelira opened her eyes. "Do you want me?" Isolde's control cracked, only a little, enough that her scent deepened, cedar smoke turning warmer, iron sharpening beneath snow. "Yes." Alira's knees nearly weakened. "Because you pity me?" "No." "Because I am convenient?" "No." "Because I made the gown?" Isolde's eyes moved to the dress, then back. "Because when you are in a room, I know exactly where you are, even before I see you. Because when you lower your eyes, I want to burn the floor teaching you to look there. Because your silence has weight. Because your hands create beauty even when the world gives you nothing soft to hold." Alira's tears fell. Isolde's voice lowered. "Because I have faced armies with less fear than I feel standing before you now." Aelira whispered, "You are afraid." "Yes." "Of me? Of hurting you? Of asking too much? Of becoming one more woman who takes from you and calls it honor?" Aelira looked at the wedding gown she had cursed and cherished. The gown she had believed belonged to someone else. Her gown, if she wanted it. Her hands rose to her own sleeves. Plain gray wool, workroom cloth, a seamstress's uniform. She thought of walking into the chapel wearing moon silk and pearl moons. She thought of the court, staring. Maravan's empty place, the council's outrage. The whispers, the danger. Then she thought of Isolde waiting at the threshold, not as a duchess claiming property, but as an alpha, offering her hand before everyone who had ever looked through Aelira and seen nothing. "What happens if I say yes?" Aelira asked. Zara quietly moved toward the door. Isolde did not take her eyes off Aelira. Then I protect you. Aelira shook her head. No, not that. Isolde went quiet. Aelira wiped her cheeks. I believe you can protect me from them. I do. But what happens after? When protection becomes a cage, when everyone fears touching me because I belong to you. When I become another symbol in your house, another silent Omega in a beautiful gown. Isolde's expression changed. Not offended. Listening. Aelira drew a shaky breath. I do not want to be displayed. I do not want to be rescued, only to disappear into softer rooms. I want to sew if I choose. I want to design. I want the women in that workroom paid fairly and treated like people. I want Serena's sister safe. I want Maravin's cruelty exposed, not hidden, because scandal is inconvenient. I want a name beside yours, not beneath it. Silence. Then Isolde lowered herself to one knee. Aelira stopped breathing. Nyxera froze at the door. In every mirror, Duchess Isolde Veyrath knelt before the Omega Seamstress, not bowed. Knelt. Aelira's hand flew to her chest. Do not, she whispered. Isolde looked up at her. You said you wanted a name beside mine. This is not. This is where I place it. Aelira's tears returned. Isolde held out her bare hand, palm up. Then hear me as witness, Captain Nyxera, and as many mirrors as this ridiculous hall insists upon. Nyxera's voice was quiet. I witness. Isolde's gaze remained on Aelira. Aelira, daughter of no house that deserved to lose you, maker of moon silk, keeper of tenderness, sharper than any needle you carry. I ask you to stand beside me, not as an ornament, not as a debt, not as a secret, and not because I command it. Aelira trembled, voice. I ask because I want you, because I trust you, because I would rather face every council in the north alone than bind you unwillingly. Isolde's hand remained steady. If you choose me, I will give you my name. If you refuse me, I will still give you my protection until you no longer need it. Your yes will not purchase safety. Your no will not remove it. Aelira broke. Sound left her, small and wounded. For years, every kindness had carried a hook. A meal meant obedience. A roof meant silence. Compliment meant debt. But this was terrifying because it was clean. Aelira looked at Isolde's hand, then at the gown, then at her own reflection. What bride could you ever be? Maravin's voice echoed in memory. Aelira stepped forward. She placed her hand in Isolde's. This one, she whispered. Isolde's eyes brightened, not with tears. No. Duchess Veyrath did not cry in the Hall of Mirrors, but something in her gaze shone like ice-catching dawn. Aelira squeezed her hand. Yes, she said. The word was soft. The mirrors carried it anyway. Isolde. The Alpha closed her eyes for 1 second. Only one. Then she rose, still holding Aelira's hand. Nyxera cleared her throat gently. My lady, the council is still waiting. Isolde looked at Aelira. Aelira almost laughed through her tears. Then we should not keep them waiting. Xara's mouth curved. Poor council! Isolde finally smiled. A real smile. Small, rare, devastating. Aelira stared at it like a fool. Then Isolde lifted her hand and touched Aelira's cheek, just below the red mark. May I? Aelira knew what she was asking. Not may I touch you. She was already touching her. May I tend to what they did? Aelira nodded. Isolde brushed her thumb near the mark, with such restraint that Aelira's eyes burned again. I will find who struck you. No. Isolde stilled. Aelira covered the Alpha's hand with her own. I will tell you. And then we will decide what happens. Not revenge first. Justice. Isolde studied her, nodded once. Together. The word settled between them. Together. It felt more impossible than any vow. Council chamber exploded exactly as expected. Lady Alicia Varn, eldest of the Northern Advisors, struck her cane against the floor. So hard the silver tip rang. Absolutely not. Chic. Aelira stood beside Isolde, beneath the black banners of House Veyrath, still wearing her gray work dress, her hair half fallen, her cheek marked, her hands raw. Every councilwoman's stared at her, some with shock, some with disgust, some with calculation already waking behind their eyes. There were 12 councilwomen in the chamber, all women of rank, age, power, or enough wealth to imitate power. 5 alphas, 6 omegas, 1 beta archivist, whose family had recorded Veyrath law since before the keep was built. Not one of them looked pleased. Isolde stood calm beside Aelira. That helped. Not because Aelira needed the alpha's strength to replace her own, because fear was easier to face when someone refused to let it stand alone. Alicia pointed her cane at Aelira. This is madness. Isolde, his voice was flat. Lower your cane. Alicia's face flushed. I have served House Veyrath since before you were born, and yet you still know where the floor is. The cane lowered. Aelira pressed her lips together. Not the time to smile. Definitely not. Councilwoman Brevel, a sharp-eyed omega with silver rings on every finger, leaned forward. My lady, no one questions your right to choose a bride under old rite. Wise. But the rite was intended for noble matches, conducted a threat under political interference. It was intended to keep councils from choosing brides for Veyrath alphas. Brevel's eyes narrowed. A technical reading. Accurate one. Lady Alicia snapped. She is a servant. Aelira felt every eye sharpen. Isolde did not respond immediately. Instead, at Aelira, a question. Do you want me to answer? Aelira's heart turned over, even here, especially here. She drew a breath. I am a seamstress. Alicia stared at her as if a chair had spoken. Aelira's knees wanted to tremble. She did not allow them. Put. I have served in this keep for 4 years. I have hemmed the council's robes, repaired their gloves, reset their torn lace, adjusted mourning veils, altered ceremonial cloaks, and sewn the winter banners behind you. Several councilwomen glanced instinctively at the banners. Aelira continued, I know. Which of you require hidden seams for stiff shoulders? Which of you loosen your bodices after dinner? Which of you pretend your gowns fit without alteration? Captain Nixera made a strangled sound near the wall. Isolde's mouth did not move, but Aelira felt amusement from her, like warmth. Councilwoman Brevel sat back slowly. Aelira lifted her chin. I am not noble, but do not call me a servant as if service has made me less observant than you. Silence. Then, Isolde said, There is your future Duchess. Aelira's stomach flipped. Future Duchess. The council reacted like a window had shattered. Voices rose at once. Impossible. The conclave will never accept this. The mountain houses will see weakness. The river packs will withdraw tribute, undermine succession. An untrained omega cannot. Isolde raised one hand. The chamber fell silent. We will address matters in order. Alicia laughed bitterly. There is no order left. There will be. Isolde turned slightly toward the archivist. Read the old rite. The archivist, a thin woman named Thavara, adjusted her spectacles and opened the massive legal codex before her. Her fingers shook only a little. Alsair. The Alpha of House Veyrath may, under winter moon and before hearth witness, name a bride of her own choosing. The named bride, if willing, shall be recognized by house, court, and territory. No council, bloodline, ally, or rival may unmake the vow once accepted. Limitations? Isolde asked. Thavara swallowed. None recorded. Rank requirement? None. Bloodline requirement? None. Designation requirement? None. Alpha, Omega, or Beta may be named, though historically is not law. Thavara nodded. No, Duchess. Isolde looked back at the council. There will be no debate on whether I can choose her. I have. She has accepted. Aelira's skin warmed. Accepted. She had accepted. How could one word feel like both a doorway and a storm? Brevel leaned forward again, voice more controlled. Then we must discuss preparation, court training, public introduction, security. The wedding cannot occur in 2 days. It can. My lady, it will. Aelira slammed her palm on the table. You would place an unprepared Omega before the entire Northern Conclave. Aelira answered before Isolde could. No. Everyone looked at her. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself on. She will place me before the chapel, not the conclave. Not yet. Isolde watched her carefully. Aelira looked at the councilwomen. I'm not ready to govern your territories. I am not foolish enough to pretend otherwise. I do not know your alliances, your feuds, tax structures, or which noble house is secretly poisoning, which other noble house through marriage negotiations. No one laughed, told her enough. Aelira continued, but I can learn, and if I am to become Duchess consort, I will learn from records, not gossip, from ledgers, not flattery, from the women who actually keep this place alive, not only the women who sit in this chamber. Brevel's eyes sharpened with interest. Aelira looked horrified. Isolde looked like she wanted to kiss her. That was dangerous. Aelira looked away quickly. I will not pretend to be noble. You would see through it, and I would hate myself for trying. But I will become competent. The word landed stronger than beautiful ever could. Competent. Prepared. Useful by choice, not exploitation. Aelira turned to Isolde. You still want me beside you after hearing that I will be difficult. The Alpha's expression softened. I was counting on it. Aelira's heart betrayed her by glowing. Aelira muttered, Moons spare us. Isolde faced the council again. Lady, Maravin's conspiracy will be recorded. Srin and her sister will remain under my protection. Sewing staff will be interviewed privately regarding working conditions. Any retaliation against them will be treated as an offense against my house. Aelira looked at her sharply. Isolde did not look back, but her hand, in between them, brushed Aelira's once. A promise. Brevel folded her hands. And the gown? Aelira blinked. What about it? Brevel looked at her. Will you wear the gown you made? The chamber shifted. The question was not innocent. If Aelira said yes, they would say she had planned this, that she had sewed ambition into every seam. If she said no, claim. She rejected House Veyrath's ceremony. Aelira understood the trap. So did Isolde. The Alpha's gaze darkened, but Aelira squeezed her fingers once. Let me. Aelira faced Brevel. Yes, whispers. Aelira lifted her chin. I made it with my own hands. Stitch. Every pearl. Every line of embroidery. If this court believes that makes me shameful, then let them explain why they praised it when they thought another woman would wear it. Brevel stared at her then. Slowly, she smiled, not kindly, but not cruelly either. Interesting, she said. Aelira looked ready to faint. Isolde said, the ceremony remains as scheduled. No one argued after that. Not because they agreed, because they were thinking. That was almost worse. Aelira left the council chamber, with Isolde at her side, feeling as if she had walked out of a burning room without realizing her dress had caught fire. The corridor outside was empty except for Nyxara. The captain closed the doors behind them and exhaled. Well, she said, could have gone worse. Aelira looked at her. How? Nyxara considered. Someone could have fainted. Isolde said. Aelira tried. She remained upright. Disappointing. Aelira laughed. The sound surprised her. It surprised Isolde, too. Duchess looked at her with such quiet wonder that Aelira's laughter faded into something softer. Nyxara suddenly became fascinated by the wall. I will arrange additional guards, she said. For both of you. Aelira's smile vanished. Both? Nyxara's expression sobered. Especially you, voice. The choice had been made. Now came the consequences. Isolde turned to the captain. No one enters Aelira's rooms without her consent. Aelira blinked. My rooms? You cannot return to the sewing dormitory tonight. I have belongings there. I will have them brought. No. Isolde looked at her. Aelira steadied herself. I will collect them myself. Tomorrow. In daylight. With whoever you think necessary standing outside the door, not inside it. A pause. Then Isolde nodded. Agreed. Aelira watched the exchange with an approving look that vanished the moment Isolde noticed. Captain. Yes, Duchess? Find out who struck her, Aelira said. I said we would decide together. Isolde's eyes returned to her. Yes, but we cannot decide without knowing. Aelira hated that this was reasonable. Nyxara bowed. I will ask quietly. Quietly, Aelira repeated. The captain inclined her head. As you wish, future Duchess. Aelira froze. Nyxara walked away before Aelira could react. Isolde looked at her. Are you all right? No. Good. Aelira stared. Isolde corrected herself. I mean, that is understandable. This time Aelira did smile. Small, tired, real. Isolde looked at her mouth, then away. Aelira noticed. Heat climbed her throat. They stood in the corridor like two women who had just agreed to change the entire North and had no idea what to do with their hands. Finally, Isolde said, You need rest. You keep saying that. You keep not resting. I was busy sewing your bride's gown. Isolde's gaze warmed. Our gown. Aelira's breath caught. The words were simple, lethal. Our gown. She looked down before her face betrayed too much. Isolde offered her arm. Not hand. Arm. Formal enough for corridors. Intimate enough to make Aelira's pulse trip. May I walk you to your rooms? Aelira looked at the offered arm. Then at the Alpha. You ask that after announcing me to your council? Yes. Strange order of manners. I am learning. Aelira slipped her hand around Isolde's arm. The Alpha went still. Only for a fraction of a second. But Aelira felt it. Power did not vanish beneath her fingers. It restrained itself, the walk through Frostmere Keep felt different. Nothing had changed. Everything had. The same torches burned in iron brackets. Same old stones held the same cold. The same portraits of severe Veyrath women watched from the walls, their painted eyes full of judgment. But Aelira no longer walked, with her shoulders curved inward. But she did not walk boldly. Not yet. But she did not shrink. Servants saw them. Guards saw them. A pair of noblewomen near the east stair stopped mid-whisper, eyes widening as Aelira passed on the Duchess's arm. By morning, Frostmere Keep would know. By sunrise, the first rumors would reach the Loa town. By noon, every noble house within riding distance would be choking on the news. The Seamstress, the Omega, the nobody, the bride. Aelira's grip tightened slightly on Isolde's sleeve. Isolde leaned closer, not enough to be improper, enough for Aelira to hear. Breathe. I am not well. Aelira almost laughed again. I cannot believe I accepted a proposal from a woman who critiques my breathing. I critique dangerous habits. Breathing? Poorly. This time, the laugh escaped. A few servants turned. Aelira flushed. Isolde looked pleased with herself. That was unexpected, and unfairly charming. The rooms Isolde brought her to were in the western wing, far above the servants' quarters, but below the ducal suites. They had once belonged to visiting dignitaries. A sitting room with dark blue walls, a bedroom with a canopied bed, large enough to make Aelira uncomfortable. A fireplace, already lit, heavy curtains, a writing desk, a washstand with hot water, steaming in a porcelain bowl. Aelira stood just inside the doorway. This is too much. Isolde removed her gloves slowly. It is a room. It is 3 rooms. It is still fewer than I have. That is not comforting. I am bad at comforting you tonight. Aelira turned. Alpha was watching her with the same careful restraint as before. Aelira softened. No, you are not. See, the words seemed to strike Isolde harder than expected. She looked down at her gloves. I do not want you to feel trapped here. Aelira looked around the room. The fine furniture, the thick carpets, the locked windows. No, not locked. She checked. Unlatched. Of course Isolde had thought of that. Alira's chest hurt again. She walked to the window and opened it a crack. Cold air slipped in, smelling of snow and pine. Then she turned back. I feel overwhelmed. Isolde nodded. I feel angry. At me? A little. Isolde accepted that with a grave nod. I feel afraid. Another nod, and I feel. Aelira stopped, hopeful. She could not say it yet. Hope was still too tender, too new, too easily crushed. Isolde did not force the word from her. I will leave you to rest. Aelira should have let her. Instead, she said, stay for a moment. Isolde stilled. Aelira sat on the edge of the sofa near the fireplace, suddenly too tired to stand. Not long, she said, just until the room feels less like someone else's life. Don't. Isolde crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite her. Not beside her. Aelira noticed that too. The fire cracked softly. For a while, neither spoke. The silence did not feel empty. It felt like cloth laid carefully over a wound. Aelira looked at Isolde's hands. You have scars. Yes. More so. Some trainings, mistakes. One kitchen accident involving a very sharp pear knife. Aelira blinked. You? I was 12. What did the pear do? Resisted. Aelira laughed so suddenly she had to cover her mouth. Isolde's eyes warmed. There she was again. Not the butcher of Grey Pass. Not the Duchess. A woman who had once lost a fight with a pear. Aelira leaned back, exhaustion pulling at her bones. Do you know what everyone calls you? Yes. Which name? There are several. The butcher of Grey Pass. Isolde's face became still. Aelira immediately regretted it. I am sorry. It is true enough. Is it? Isolde looked into the fire. The battle was ugly. All battles are ugly. That one followed me home. Aelira waited. Isolde's voice was quiet when she continued. Seen? The rebel leaders had taken 3 villages and executed the local healers. Believed I would negotiate. Because winter was coming and my supply lines were weak. Did you? No. Aelira studied her profile. What did you do? What was necessary? The answer closed a door. Aelira could have left it there. A safer woman would have. But Aelira was beginning to suspect she had never been as safe as everyone assumed. Necessary things can still haunt you. Isolde's gaze moved to her. The firelight made her eyes look darker. Yes, Aelira nodded. That does not make you cruel. No. No. Cruelty enjoys itself. Isolde was silent for a long time. Then she said, Maravin enjoyed herself. Yes. I wanted to hurt her. I know. Still do. I know. Isolde looked at her. Does that frighten you? Aelira considered lying, then chose not to. A little. Isolde's expression tightened. But not because I think you would hurt me, Aelira said. Because I think you would hurt someone for me. Part of me would be glad. Isolde inhaled slowly. Aelira looked down at her hands. That is what frightens me. Not your darkness. Mine. The room became very quiet. Then Isolde said, We will keep each other from becoming what they expect. Aelira looked up. Alpha's voice was steady. They expect me to be a weapon. They expect you to be grateful for the hand that holds it. Let us disappoint them. Aelira stared at her, then smiled faintly. You say the strangest, romantic things. I warned you I am bad at comforting. No, Aelira said softly. That one worked. Isolde's gaze dropped briefly to her mouth again. Aelira's breath changed. The fire seemed louder. They were across the room from each other. Too far for anything improper. Too near for pretending. Aelira whispered, Have you thought about kissing me? The question left her body before shame could catch it. Isolde's eyes lifted, restraint in them nearly burned. Yes, Elytra's heart beat once. Hard. How often? Aelira. A faint, pained smile touched Isolde's mouth. You are exhausted. That is not an answer. It is a reason. To avoid answering? To avoid taking advantage of a night in which you have been humiliated, threatened, proposed to, politically announced, and relocated. Aelira stared at her, then sighed. You are annoyingly honorable. I am trying to be. I know. She curled her fingers into the sofa. I have thought about kissing you too. Isolde closed her eyes. Aelira felt powerful. Not because Isolde was weak, because desire had crossed the room and found them both standing. I do not want our first kiss to be stolen from your exhaustion, Isolde said. Aelira looked into the fire. Our first kiss. The phrase tasted impossible. Isolde stood abruptly. Aelira looked back. Alpha's control had reached its limit. Not dangerously. Beautifully. I will go, Isolde said. Aelira rose too. The Alpha stopped at the door. Aelira walked toward her. Slowly. She did not touch her. Not yet. Thank you for asking. Isolde's eyes softened. Always. Then she left. Aelira stood in the doorway long after the Alpha disappeared down the corridor. That night, Aelira slept in a bed too large for her. She woke 3 times, each time reaching for a needle that was not there. The 4th time, just before dawn, she woke because someone was singing. Not loudly, not nearby. A soft, wordless tune drifted from the courtyard below. Aelira rose, wrapped herself in the robe laid near the bed, and went to the window. Below, in the blue-gray snowlight, a group of laundry women crossed the courtyard carrying buckets. One of them sang under her breath. Another joined. Then a third. Their voices rose faintly into the cold. A work song. Aelira knew it. She had sung it once while scrubbing sheets until her hands cracked. Before the keep. Before the sewing room. Before Isolde. The song was about a moon moth that hid in a sleeve to survive winter. Aelira gripped the window frame. By breakfast, the whole keep knew. No one said it to her directly. They did not need to. Aelira stepped into the corridor. 2 scards straightened so sharply she nearly apologized. Then remembered she did not have to. Young maid carrying towels saw her and dropped into a curtsy. Aelira panicked. Please do not do that. The maid froze. Aelira also froze. Guard on the left stared very hard at the opposite wall. Aelira cleared her throat. I mean, good morning. The maid looked terrified. Good morning, my lady. My lady. The words hit Aelira like a thrown shoe. She retreated into her room and closed the door. 5 minutes later, Captain Nixara knocked. Aelira opened it only a crack. Nixara took one look at her face and said, The first, my lady, is always the worst. Aelira opened the door wider. How many until it stops feeling like a joke? In my experience, never. But you learn to weaponize it. Aelira stared. Nixara held out a tray. Breakfast. Aelira looked past her. Where is the servant who brought it? I sent her away before you could frighten her with kindness. I do not frighten people. You told a maid not to curtsy, probably in the laundry room, wondering if curtsying is treason now. Aelira groaned. Nixara entered and set the tray down. There was tea, dark bread, butter, honey, baked apples, and a small bowl of cream. Aelira's stomach made a sound. Nixara politely pretended not to hear. Duchess is in council, she said. She asked me to escort you to the sewing dormitory when you are ready. Aelira touched her own hair. I am not ready. The dormitory can wait. No, I mean, generally. Nixara's expression softened. No one ever is. Aelira sat at the table. Were you to command the guard? No, I vomited before my first inspection. Aelira blinked. You? Into a decorative urn. Despite herself, Aelira laughed. Nixara poured tea. The Duchess keeps women around her who have survived their own first humiliations. Remember that when the polished ones start hissing. Aelira wrapped both hands around the cup. Does everyone think this is a disaster? Yes, Aelira winced. Nixara added, everyone important thinks most things are disasters until they benefit from them. That is not comforting, I learned from Isolde. Alia smiled into her tea, then remembered the council, the wedding, the gown, Maravan, the entire north. The smile faded. What happens today? Nixara leaned against the wall. You collect your belongings. The Duchess meets with the archivist regarding legal recognition. Sewing staff is interviewed by my lieutenant. Lady Maravan remains confined. Lady Olysia writes furious letters. Lady Brevel pretends she is not intrigued. By afternoon, the chapel decorators will begin changing the bridal banners. Aelira paused. Changing them how? Your colors. I do not have colors. You do now. Aelira stared into her tea. What are they? That is for you to decide. I do not even know how to decide colors. Nixara shrugged. Start with colors you like. No one had asked Aelira what colors she liked in years. Not for herself. She knew what colors noble women liked. What shades flattered candlelight. What dyes faded in winter. What thread best looked expensive without being expensive. But her? Aelira looked toward the window. Snow fell beyond it. White. Gray. Silver. Then she thought of moths hidden in sleeves. Pearl, she said slowly, and soft gold, not yellow. Gold like candlelight through cream. Nixara nodded as if this were military strategy. And, Aelira hesitated. Deep green, like pine branches under snow. The captain smiled. Good colors. Are they? They sound like someone who plans to survive winter. Aelira looked down. Maybe she did. The sewing dormitory went silent when Aelira entered. She had expected whispers. Silence was worse. 16 seamstresses sat or stood around the long workroom. Some held needles frozen above fabric. Some stared openly. The head seamstress, Mistress Vadra, stood near the cutting table, face pinched and unreadable. Aelira wore her gray work dress from the night before. She had refused the blue gown someone had sent to her rooms, not because it was ugly. It was beautiful. That was the problem. She could not enter the workroom dressed like one of the women who had looked down on them yesterday. Not yet. Nixara waited outside as promised. 2 guards stood beside her. Inside, Aelira stood alone. Mistress Vadra curtsied first. The others scrambled to follow. Aelira almost said, "Please do not." She stopped herself. Maybe this was not about liking it. Maybe this was about understanding what every gesture meant before rejecting it. "Good morning," she said. A chorus of awkward replies followed. Aelira looked around the room. Her stool, her basket. The little shelf where she kept scraps too pretty to throw away. The cracked mug by the window, the loose floorboard, where she had hidden 2 silver coins and a dried lavender sachet. 4 years of life, reduced to what could fit in a box. Mistress Vadra stepped forward. "My lady, we would have brought your belongings." My lady in that voice sounded like choking. Aelira looked at her cheeky measuring cord hanging from her belt. The same ones. Her skin prickled. "You struck me yesterday." The room stopped breathing. Mistress Vadra's face drained. "I was correcting. You struck me." The head seamstress bowed her head. "Yes, my lady." The title was a shield now. Aelira hated it. She walked to the cutting table and touched the edge, worn smooth by years of hands. "Why?" Vadra looked up, startled. "My lady, why did you strike me?" The older Omega's mouth opened, closed. Aelira waited. Finally, Vadra said, "Because I was afraid." Aelira had expected excuses, not honesty. Vadra swallowed. Lady Maravan said if there was scandal in my workroom, lose my position. I knew the rumors. I saw the handkerchief. I thought if I punished you, it would prove I had no part in whatever happened. Aelira's hands curled. So you used my face as your proof. Vajra flinched. Yes. The room remained silent. Several seamstresses looked down. Aelira saw the truth then. Not as a sudden revelation, but as a pattern she had been too close to name. Fear moved downward. Always downward. Council threatened steward. Steward threatened head seamstress. Head seamstress struck Omega worker. Omega worker swallowed pain because there was no one beneath her to pass it to. Until there was. Until Sarin had passed it to Aelira. Until Aelira stood there with power near enough to use. She could ruin Vajra. One word to Isolde and the woman would be dismissed. Aelira imagined it. For one bright sense, she enjoyed it. Then she let the thought go. Did you strike others? She asked. Vadra's silence answered. Aelira looked around. No one moved. Raise your hand. If Mistress Vajra has hit you with the cord. No one did. Aelira waited. One hand rose near the back. Then another. Then 5. Then 9. Vajra closed her eyes. Aelira felt sick. She turned back to the head seamstress. Give the cord to Captain Nixera. Vajra removed it with shaking hands. You will not strike anyone again. No, my lady. You will cooperate with the interviews. Yes, my lady. And you will apologize to every woman you hurt. Not now. Not in front of me for performance. Properly. Individually. If they do not accept, that is their right. Vadra's eyes filled. Yes, my lady. Aelira nodded. Only then did she go to her shelf and begin packing. No one spoke for a while. Then a seamstress named Elowen, who had once shared bread with Aelira during a snow shortage, came forward holding the cracked mug. Do you want this? Aelira looked at it. The mug was ugly. Chipped blue glaze. A hairline crack near the handle. She had used it every morning. Yes. Elowen wrapped it in cloth carefully. Another seamstress brought her lavender sachet. Another found her spare needles. Another folded her old shawl. The silence changed, became less afraid, more grieving. When Aelira lifted her box, Elowen touched her sleeve. Is it true? Aelira met her eyes. Yes. Elowen's gaze dropped, then rose again. Did you know when you made the gown? Aelira almost laughed. No. Elowen's mouth trembled. Moon above. I know. A small smile broke through Elowen's fear. You cursed at the hem for 3 hours. Aelira covered her face. I did. Called the pearl moons. Smug. They were. A laugh moved through the workroom. Tiny, dangerous, needed. Aelira lowered her hands and found several women smiling. Not because everything was repaired. It was not. Because a seamstress who had cursed at her own bridal hem was now future. Duchess, and sometimes absurdity, was the first kindness after terror. Mistress Vajra stood aside as Aelira walked to the door. My lady, Aelira paused. Vajra bowed. I am sorry. Aelira looked at her for a long moment. I know, she did not say forgiven. Not yet. That, too, was a choice. Outside, Nixera took the box, despite Aelira's protest. Aelira held only the cracked mug. The captain glanced at it. Treasure? Yes. Then guard it well. Weddings are dangerous for mugs. By afternoon, Aelira had met 3 ladies-in-waiting, dismissed 2, because they spoke about her as if she were fabric, endured a fitting for undergarments. She did not know how to name, argued successfully that she would not wear a corset. So tight she could not breathe. The seamstress assigned to fit her was Elowen. It had been Isolde's doing. Aelira knew because Elowen arrived in the western rooms looking stunned, carrying pins, and 3 assistants, who treated her with sudden respect. Power moved quickly when it changed direction. The wedding gown was brought in just before sunset. Aelira stood before it in her shift, hair loose over her shoulders, while Elowen adjusted the waist with reverent hands. It already fits almost perfectly, Elowen whispered. Aelira stared at the mirror. Gown was not fully fastened yet, but even unfinished upon her body, it seemed impossible. Moon-white silk against her skin, frost-vine sleeves, pearl moons at her waist. The neckline shaped to her collarbones, as if she had known. Some secret part of her had known exactly where it would rest. Aelira touched the embroidery. Her hands shook. "I made this." Elwyn smiled through tears. "Yes, for me. Yes." Aelira swallowed. "I do not know how to wear something I cannot disappear in." Elwyn stepped behind her. "Then do not disappear." Aelira met her eyes in the mirror. Elwyn's smile grew. "Terrible advice, I know. I am new to advising duchesses." Aelira laughed softly. The door opened after a knock. Isolde's voice came from the other side. "May I enter?" Everyone froze. Elwyn looked horrified. "The gown!" Aelira's heart lurched. Tradition said the Alpha should not see the bride in the gown before the ceremony. Tradition had done very little for Aelira, except provide new ways for powerful women to control doors. Aelira looked at herself in the mirror and at the door. "Yes," Elwyn whispered. "Are you sure?" Aelira surprised herself by smiling. "No." Then louder. "Come in." Isolde entered. Stopped. The room became motionless. She had seen Aelira in work dresses, in exhaustion, in humiliation, in fury. She had not seen this. The Alpha's face changed so completely that Aelira forgot to be self-conscious. It was not hunger first. It was wonder. Open, unguarded wonder. Isolde had entered expecting a bride, and instead found proof that the moon had learned how to breathe. Aelira's cheeks warmed. "It's not finished." Isolde did not answer. Elwyn and the assistants became extremely busy with pins, though none of them actually moved. Aelira turned slightly. The skirt whispered around her. "Isolde?" The Alpha blinked once, then seemed to remember language. "You are." She stopped. Aelira lifted a brow. "Careful." Isolde's mouth softened, beyond anything careful words can hold. Elwyn made a tiny sound. Was assistant looked like she might faint. Aelira's blush deepened all the way to her throat. "You should not say things like that in front of witnesses." "I have decided witnesses improve my honesty. That is alarming." "I thought so too." Aelira smiled, then noticed the tension behind Isolde's eyes. "You came for a reason." Isolde's expression sobered. "Yes." Elwyn stepped back. "My lady, we can return later." Aelira looked at Isolde. The Alpha nodded. Elwyn and the assistants left reluctantly, taking the pincushion, measuring ribbon, and far too many curious glances with them. When the door closed, Aelira turned back to the mirror, because facing Isolde directly felt too difficult in the gown. "What happened?" Isolde walked closer, stopping several steps behind her. "Letters have arrived." "Already?" "Ravens fly faster when carrying outrage." Aelira exhaled. "Bad?" "Mixed. Means bad. It means useful." Aelira turned. The skirt moved with her like water. Isolde's eyes dropped once, then rose immediately. Aelira noticed and gained the smallest amount of courage from it. "Tell me." "The river houses request confirmation that the wedding is lawful. Mountain houses are silent, which means they are deciding whether to be offended. The eastern border captain sent congratulations." "Sounds good." "She also requested to meet you while holding a sword." Aelira blinked. "Why?" "To judge your spine." "My spine?" "Courtship politics are strange." "I am learning." Isolde came closer. There was also a letter from the Temple of the Moon. Aelira's stomach tightened. The temple officiated high weddings. Without them, the old rite would still be legal, but politically wounded. "And? They will bless the ceremony." Aelira let out a breath. "Then, why do you look like that?" Isolde's jaw shifted. The high priestess included a warning. "About me? About both of us?" Aelira waited. Isolde drew a folded letter from her coat. She says old rights, awaken old expectations. If I name you before the threshold, the court will expect a claiming display. Aelira's body went still. Every Omega knew what that meant. Not a full bond, not necessarily, but a public gesture, a scent mark, a touch at the throat or wrist, an Alpha's claim made visible enough to silence challenge. Aelira's fingers rose unconsciously to her neck. Isolde saw. I told the temple no. Aelira looked at her. You refused? Yes. But if the court expects, they can expect elsewhere. Aelira almost smiled despite the fear. Isolde, no. The Alpha's voice was firm. I will not put my mouth on your throat in front of a court to prove ownership. Aelira's pulse betrayed her at the phrase mouth on your throat. Isolde went still. Aelira closed her eyes. Wonderful. Just wonderful. Her scent had probably changed too. When she opened her eyes, Isolde was looking at the window with heroic determination. Aelira said, I do not want to be claimed like property. I know. But Isolde looked back carefully. Aelira forced herself to continue. I also do not want them to think I am untouched by choice, because you are ashamed of me. Isolde's gaze sharpened. Never. I know. But they do not. Them misunderstand. They will use misunderstanding as a weapon. Isolde was silent. Aelira looked down at the pearl moons on her waist. What would the display require? Aelira. I am asking. Isolde's restraint returned, fierce and visible. A touch. A scent mark. Usually at the wrist for political matches. At the throat for romantic ones. Aelira's mouth went dry. Romantic ones? Yes. And the bond? Not required. Never without consent. Never publicly. Aelira nodded slowly. Her heart was beating too hard. Thought of every woman in the chapel, watching, waiting to see if Isolde would touch her like a secret or a shame. She thought of Maravin's voice. Bride could you ever be? She thought of Isolde kneeling. Your yes will not purchase safety. Your no will not remove it. Aelira lifted her wrist. Isolde looked at it, as if it were both gift and trial. A wrist mark, Aelira said. The Alpha's eyes darkened. You do not have to. I know. Do you? Aelira smiled faintly. I am trying to. Isolde took a slow breath. Aelira kept her wrist lifted. Not now, Isolde said. I know. You choose it tomorrow. You can change your mind at the threshold. I know. And if you choose the wrist, will not let anyone say it means less. Aelira's smile trembled. Because it is not my throat. Because it is your choice. Aelira lowered her wrist. The room softened around them. Then a thought struck her. What if I want? She stopped. Isolde waited. Aelira looked at the floor, then forced herself to look back up. What if I want the first mark to be private? The Alpha went utterly still. Aelira's voice dropped. Not a claim, not a bond. Just something that is ours before it becomes theirs to interpret. Isolde did not move for several heartbeats. When she spoke, her voice was low enough to make Aelira's knees remember they were not stone. What are you asking me for? Aelira's courage flickered, then steadied. A kiss. The word warmed the air. Isolde closed her eyes. Aelira whispered, only if you want. Yes. The answer came too fast for dignity. Aelira's lips parted. Isolde opened her eyes, and there was no Duchess in them now, only the woman. Yes, she repeated, softer. But not because we are angry. Not because the court demands proof. Not because fear is chasing us. Aelira nodded. Because I choose it. Isolde crossed the remaining distance between them. Slowly, giving Aelira time. Aelira did not retreat. Gown whispered as she breathed. Isolde lifted one hand but stopped before touching her. Aelira understood. She reached up and placed Isolde's hand against her own cheek. The Alpha's palm was warm. Aelira leaned into it. Both of them exhaled. Isolde bent her head. The first kiss was not fierce. That almost made it worse. It was careful, so careful. Aelira felt her heart ache with it. His lips touched hers like a question asked in a sacred room. Aelira answered by rising slightly onto her toes, one hand catching the front of Isolde's coat. The Alpha made a low sound in her throat. Not a growl. Not quite. Aelira felt it more than heard it. Her Omega instincts opened like a flower in winter. Safe. Wanted. Seen. She kissed Isolde again, less carefully this time. Alpha's hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, not gripping, only holding. Alira's fingers curled tighter in her coat. Scent of cedar smoke surrounded her, deep and warm, and beneath it something rare from Isolde herself. Longing. Not possession. Longing. Parted. Aelira's eyes remained closed. Isolde's forehead rested lightly against hers. Neither spoke. The silence had changed again. It was no longer cloth over a wound. It was a vow neither had yet said aloud. At last, Aelira whispered, "I am still angry with you." Isolde's breath touched her lips. "I know, and afraid, I know. And I might panic tomorrow. Then I will wait." Aelira opened her eyes, even at the threshold, especially there. Aelira believed her. That was the terrifying part. The wedding day dawned clear and brutally cold. Frost covered every window in Frostmere Keep. The chapel bells rang before sunrise, deep iron notes rolling across the snowbound town below. Ravens circled the eastern tower, black against a pale sky. In the courtyard, guards lined the path to the chapel, while servants scattered pine needles and salt across the stone. Aelira woke before anyone came to dress her. A few minutes' insistence. She stayed still beneath the blankets and listened. Footsteps in the corridor. Women murmuring, distant bells. Her own heartbeat, today. The word felt too small. She rose and washed alone because she needed one final moment where her body belonged to no ceremony, no court, no expectation. She braided the front of her hair with trembling fingers, then unbraided it because it looked terrible, laughed at herself. Because becoming future Duchess had not made her magically skilled at hair. A knock came. Elwyn entered with 3 seamstresses, 2 ladies in waiting, and Captain Nixara, who carried Aelira's cracked blue mug like a holy relic. Aelira stared. "Why do you have that?" Nixara held it out. "Tea tastes better from weapons you trust." Aelira took the mug. Inside was hot tea with honey. Her eyes stung. "Thank you." The captain nodded, then the room became motion. Hair brushed and pinned. Skin warmed with scented oil. Sleeves eased over arms. Buttons fastened. Pearl moons checked. The gown rose around Aelira piece by piece, no longer an object on a frame, but a second skin made of every night she had survived to sew it. Elwyn fastened the final closure at the back. The room went silent. Aelira looked in the mirror. For a moment, she did not recognize herself. Not because she looked noble, because silk had transformed her into someone else. Because she looked like herself without apology. The gown did not hide the mark, still faintly visible on her cheek. It did not erase the needle scars on her fingers. It did not make her taller, richer, sharper, colder. It made visible what had always been there: softness, endurance, a quiet will. Lyra touched one sheer sleeve. Tenderness. Elwyn was crying. One of the ladies in waiting dabbed her own eyes and tried to pretend she was not. Nixara cleared her throat. "Your colors have been placed in the chapel." Aelira nodded. "Pearl, soft gold, and pine green?" "Yes." "How angry is Lady Alicia?" Festively, Aelira laughed. Then the bells changed. Nixara straightened. "It is time." Aelira's laughter vanished. The room tilted slightly. Elwyn took her hands. "Breathe." Aelira inhaled, exhaled again. "You made this gown," Elwyn whispered. "You can walk in it." Aelira nodded. Captain Nixara opened the door. The corridor outside was lined with guards. Women bowed as Aelira stepped out. This time, she did not tell them to stop. not because she had begun to enjoy it. Because she understood, now that some gestures could be rewritten, they were not bowing to a noble bloodline. They were bowing to a seamstress who had entered the story by a servant door and refused to leave through shame. The walk to the chapel felt endless. Every corridor held witnesses. Servants, guards, clerks, kitchen girls, visiting nobles, all watching. Some faces were warm, some shocked, some unreadable. At the top of the chapel stairs, Serene stood with her younger sister. Both curtsied. Aelira paused. Serene's eyes filled with tears. Aelira reached out and squeezed her hand. No words. Not here. But Serene understood. Then, Aelira climbed the stairs. The chapel doors stood closed. Behind them, the entire court waited. Aelira could hear the low murmur of hundreds of women. Smell wax, pine, perfume, alpha tension, omega nerves, old stone. At the threshold stood Isolde. She wore white. Aelira stopped. No one had told her. Duchess's wedding coat was white wool, embroidered, with silver and deep green thread. Dark hair was unbound for the first time Aelira had ever seen, film falling over her shoulders in waves. No armor, no war black, no severe council uniform, only Isolde. Still powerful, still dangerous, but softer at the edges, as if she had chosen to meet Aelira not as a blade, but as a vow. The Alpha turned. Her face changed the moment she saw Aelira. Aelira's fear did not vanish, but it became something she could carry. Old walked toward her, slowly, stopping an arm's length away. The chapel fell silent behind the doors. This was the threshold, the old rite, place where the Alpha would name her bride. The place where Aelira could still say no. Isolde's voice was only for her. "Are you here freely?" Aelira's throat tightened. "Yes. Are you certain?" Aelira smiled faintly. "No." Isolde's mouth curved. Aelira continued. "But I am certain I choose you." Isolde's eyes shone. She held out her hand. Aelira placed hers in it. The chapel doors opened. Sound rushed outward and stopped. Aelira saw everything at once. The long aisle lined in pine green, candles burning soft gold, pearl ribbons hanging from the rafters, council seated in front, faces stiff. The high priestess beneath the moon window, rows of noblewomen, guards, servants allowed into the back by special order, and hundreds of eyes. On her, on them, Aelira's fingers tightened. Isolde did not pull her forward yet. Instead, she turned to face the chapel. Her voice carried through the stone. "I, Isolde Veyrath, Duchess of Frostmere, Alpha of the Northern Keep, name my chosen bride before moon, hearth, and witness." Aelira felt every breath in the chapel pause. Isolde looked at her, not at the court. At her, Aelira. No house name, no false title, just her, Aelira, who came to this keep with nothing and made beauty where others made use. Aelira, who knows the weight of silence and the cost of kindness. Aelira, whose hands sewed the gown she wears before you now. Whisper stirred. Isolde's voice hardened. Anyone who calls her unworthy, remember, they praised her work before they knew, would stand beside me. Silence slammed down. Aelira's heart burned. Isolde turned fully toward her and lowered her voice, those the chapel still heard. "I choose you, not for alliance, for obedience, not for convenience. I choose you because you are the woman I want beside me." When the doors close and the titles fall silent, Aelira's tears gathered, but she did not let them fall. Not yet. The high priestess stepped forward. "Aelira," she said, voice echoing, "do you accept the name, protection, burden, and bond of House Veyrath, freely and without coercion?" Aelira looked at the chapel, at the council, Elowyn in the back, crying openly, at Sorin, clutching her sister's hand, at Lady Alicia looking as if she had bitten ice, at Lady Brevel watching with sharp interest. Then at Isolde. "As I accept, Isolde," Aelira said. A ripple moved through the chapel. Aelira lifted her chin. And I accept House Veyrath as the house that will have to make room for me. For one stunned second, no one moved. Then, somewhere in the back, a servant choked on a laugh. Nixara coughed violently. Isolde's smile appeared, small and devastating. The high priestess's lips twitched. So witnessed. The ceremony began. Aelira remembered pieces of it later. Priestess, binding their hands with a ribbon of pearl and green. Isolde's thumb brushing her wrist. The old vows spoken in northern dialect. Aelira stumbling over one line, and Isolde quietly repeating it for her. The chapel candles bending in a draught, council watching like women witnessing a law rewrite itself. Then came the mark. These high priestess paused. Under old rite, Alpha may place the first sign of chosen bond. The chapel tensest. Aelira felt it. The expectation. Throat. Wrist. Claim. Proof. Isolde looked at her. Only her. A question. Still, even now, Aelira lifted her wrist. The chapel exhaled in disappointment, relief, judgment, hunger. But Isolde did not take it immediately. She bowed her head first. To Aelira. Before everyone, then she lifted Aelira's wrist and pressed her lips to the inside pulse. Not a bite, not a brand, a kiss. Warm, lingering, reverent. Aelira's eyes closed. Isolde's scent wrapped around her, cedar and snow and iron, softened by something that belonged only to this moment. Aelira's own scent rose to meet it, rain-washed, linen and white flowers, opening beneath moonlight. The mark was not visible, not to the eyes. Every Alpha and Omega in the chapel felt it. Choice, not ownership. The high priestess smiled. So witnessed. When Isolde lifted her head, Aelira saw the court staring. Let them. Then came the final vow. Isolde and Aelira faced each other beneath the moon window. Priestess wrapped the ribbon once more around their joined hands. Before witness, speak what remains. Isolde went first. I give you my name as shelter, not chain. My power as shield, not cage. My hand in public, my truth in private, my restraint, whenever love asks more patience than hunger. Aelira nearly broke then. Her own vow was folded in her sleeve, written at dawn on a scrap of pattern paper. Because proper parchment had made her nervous, she did not take it out. She did not need it. I give you my yes as choice, not debt. My softness as strength, not weakness. My hands, which have worked for survival, and my voice, which I am still learning how to use. Her voice trembled. She kept going. I will stand beside you, not behind you, tell you when you are wrong. I will make tenderness a law in rooms that forgot it. And when you become too much a weapon, I will remind you that even blades must be put down to hold what they love. The chapel was silent. Aelira looked at Isolde. I choose you. Isolde's lips parted slightly. Aelira smiled through tears. Again, the high priestess tied the ribbon. Then by moon, hearth, witness, and will, you are bound in name. The chapel bells rang. The sound thundered through stone. Aelira barely heard it because Isolde was looking at her like the world had just begun. You may kiss, the priestess said. Aelira laughed softly. Now they permit it. Isolde leaned closer. Do you? Aelira placed both hands on the front of her white coat. Yes. Kiss was not like the first. The first had belonged to a quiet room and fear softened by choice. This one belonged to bells, candles, witnesses, defiance, and the breaking of every whisper that had tried to make Aelira small. Isolde kissed her with restraint still, but not distance, kissed back with all the courage she had spent years saving without knowing why. The chapel. It erupted, not entirely in cheers. Some gasps, some shocked murmurs, some real applause from the back where the servants stood. Then more. Guards joined. Nobles followed, because fashion often began as bravery borrowed from someone else. By the time Isolde and Aelira parted, applause had become impossible to ignore. Aelira looked over Isolde's shoulder and saw Elowen clapping with both hands over her heart. Xara stood behind the council, applauding once, slowly, with the expression of a woman daring anyone to object. Lady Brevel clapped too. Lady Olzicia did not. But she was standing. Aelira would take it. The wedding feast lasted 6 hours. Aelira survived the first 2 by gripping Isolde's hand beneath the table. The high hall had been transformed. Pine branches arched over long tables. Pearl candles floated in bowls of water. Gold cloth draped the windows. The wedding gown now loosened at the back so Aelira could breathe. After the ceremony, shimmered every time she moved. Noble women approached with congratulations sharp enough to cut fruit. What an unexpected joy. How brave of the Duchess. How unique. You must be overwhelmed. Aelira learned to smile. Not too much. Just enough to make them wonder whether she understood the insult. When one alpha from the mountain houses said, "You must feel very fortunate," Aelira answered, "Yes." Though Fortune seems equally surprised, Isolde nearly choked on her wine. The mountain alphas spent the rest of the evening avoiding them. Lady Brevel approached after the second course, bowed to Isolde, then to Aelira. Duchess. Duchess consort. Aelira's spoon paused. Duchess consort. The title settled strangely. Brevel noticed but did not comment. Instead, she said, "Your chapel vow was effective." Aelira blinked. Effective? Emotional without being foolish. Political without seeming rehearsed. The line about tenderness as law has already reached 3 tables. Aelira stared at her. "I meant it. That is why it worked." Isolde watched Brevel carefully. "What do you want?" Brevel smiled. "To offer instruction." Aelira stiffened. Brevel looked at her. "You need a court tutor who does not resent your existence. I find resentment tedious. I prefer for opportunity." Aelira did not know what to say. Isolde did. "No." Brevel laughed. "My lady, I wanted to harm her. I would flatter her. She has enough enemies. What she needs is someone to explain which ones are stupid." Aelira looked between them. "Are you always like this?" Brevel's smile sharpened. "Useful? Yes." Isolde's eyes narrowed. Aelira touched her sleeve. "I will consider it." Isolde looked at her. Aelira murmured, "Beside, not behind." The alpha's irritation shifted into reluctant pride. "Consider carefully." Brevel bowed. "Of course." After she left, Isolde leaned closer. "I do not trust her." "Neither do I, then why consider it?" "Because she said opportunity, not loyalty." "That was honest." Isolde studied her. "Heard that." "Hear many things." "Yes," Isolde said softly. "You do." Aelira's cheeks warmed. The third course arrived. Roasted winter vegetables, herb bread, berry preserves, and a soup so rich Aelira nearly cried after the first spoonful. Isolde noticed. Aelira muttered, "Do not say anything." "I was not." "You were thinking too loudly." The alpha's mouth curved. "I was thinking I should have fed you properly sooner." "That would be saying something." "I am learning the difference." Aelira smiled down at her bowl. Halfway through the feast, Captain Nixara approached and bent near Isolde's ear. Whatever she said made the alpha's expression harden. Aelira saw. "What is it?" Isolde looked at Nixara. The captain nodded, then stepped back. "Maravin requested an audience," Isolde said. Aelira's stomach tightened. "Now, Brioi. She claims to have information about the council's attempts to block your recognition." Aelira glanced across the hall. Lady Olzicia was speaking stiffly with 2 noble alphas. Brevel watched from a distance over her wine cup. "Could be a trap." "Yes." "Could be true." "Yes." Aelira looked at Isolde. The alpha was already preparing to refuse. Aelira sighed. "We should hear her." "No, Isolde, our wedding feast. And if she is desperate enough to speak during it, either she has something useful or she wants attention. Can survive both." Isolde's jaw tightened. I do not want her near you. Aelira touched the inside of her own wrist, where Isolde had kissed her. She was already near me when I had no power. Let me face her once when I do. Isolde was silent. Nixara watched them with careful neutrality. Finally, Isolde said, "Together." Aelira nodded. Together. They received Maravin in a small receiving room off the hall. Not alone, Xara stood by the door. 2 guards flanked the windows. Maravin entered wearing a plain gray confinement dress. Aelira recognized the fabric, servant wool. For one brief second, satisfaction sparked, then faded. Maravin looked smaller without jewels, but not broken. Women like her did not break easily. They learned how to bend into new shapes. She curtsied. Duchess. Duchess consort. Aelira felt the title in Maravin's mouth. Bitter, forced, still said. Isolde did not invite her to sit. Maravin remained standing. Aelira sat beside Isolde on a blue sofa, hands folded in her lap. Wedding gown spread around her like moonlight. For once, Maravin was the one under inspection. Isolde spoke first. You requested an audience. Maravin looked at Aelira. I did. Then speak. Maravin's lips pressed together. Lady Alicia wrote to the temple before the ceremony, asking them to delay the blessing. Isolde showed no surprise. She failed. Yes. But she also wrote to the winter conclave. Aelira's spine straightened. Isolde's eyes sharpened. Did she say that your bride was coerced? Aelira laughed once. Maravin flinched. Aelira had not meant it to sound so cold. Maybe she did have some darkness, after all. Maravin continued. She claimed you chose a vulnerable Omega from your own staff, isolated her, elevated her too quickly, and used old right to prevent proper counsel. Aelira's laughter died. That was uglier than a simple insult, because it was close enough to concern to sound believable. Isolde's voice turned dangerous. Why tell us? Maravin looked down. 'Cause if the conclave accepts that argument, the council can petition for review of the marriage recognition. Nixara swore, softly. Isolde said, cannot unmake the vow. No, Maravin said. But they can weaken her authority, delay her legal standing, keep her from property rights, council voice, household command. Aelira felt the walls shift, not bride, symbol, wife in ceremony, nobody in law. Isolde stood. Maravin took a step back. Aelira caught Isolde's hand. The Alpha stopped. Barely. Aelira looked at Maravin. You helped create this. Maravin swallowed. Yes. Why tell me now? Maravin's face twisted. For the first time, the perfect mask failed, because Alicia promised me restoration if I helped remove you. Aelira waited. And? Maravin looked at Isolde, then back at Aelira. Then I watched the chapel. Her voice changed. Quieter. Angrier in a different way. She will not control you better than I did. She will only do it with cleaner hands and older words. Aelira studied her. Maravin hated her. That was still true. Hatred and truth could sit at the same table. What do you want? Aelira asked. Maravin's laugh was empty. Mercy would be practical. Practical for you. Yes. At least she did not pretend otherwise. Aelira looked at Isolde. The Alpha's expression said no in every language. Aelira turned back to Maravin. You will provide the letters if you have them. I have copies. Of course you do. A hint of Maravin's old smile appeared. Insurance is a noble woman's prayer. Aelira almost respected that. Almost. Them. To Captain Nixara, you will write a full confession regarding the sabotage attempt and your role in spreading false rumors. Maravin paled. That will ruin me. You asked for mercy, not rescue. Maravin's mouth closed. Aelira continued, voice. You will also name every woman you threatened beneath you. Sorin, her sister, any others. If your confession helps protect them, I will ask Duchess Veyrath to consider confinement in one of your families. lesser estates, instead of formal disgrace before the conclave. Isolde looked sharply at her. Aelira did not look back, not yet. Maravan stared. You would do that? I would consider it. Why? Aelira leaned forward slightly. Because I do not want to become you. Maravan recoiled as if struck. Aelira sat back. But do not mistake me. I am not forgiving you tonight. I am using what you know to protect what you helped endanger. For a long moment, Maravan said nothing. He bowed her head. Duchess consort. This time, the title sounded different. Not warm, never warm, but real. Nyxara escorted Maravan out. The door closed. Isolde turned to Aelira. You should have told me before offering leniency. Aelira nodded. Yes, I do not like it. I know. I want her punished. I know. Aelira stood, the gown rustling around her. I am not asking you to spare her because she deserves it. I am asking you to let me decide what justice costs me. Isolde's anger shifted. Not gone. Changed. Aelira stepped closer. She humiliated me, tried to destroy me. She would have smiled if I were sent into the snow. If I make my first act as your wife simple revenge, she will still have shaped me. Isolde closed her eyes. Aelira touched her hand. I need to choose differently. Not softly. Differently. Alpha opened her eyes. You are stronger than I am. No. Yes. Aelira smiled sadly. You knelt before me in a hall full of mirrors. Do not pretend you lack strength. Isolde's mouth softened. That was not difficult. Aelira blinked. Alpha looked at her as if the answer were obvious. Kneeling was easy. Waiting for your answers was not. Aelira's heart folded around the words, stepped into Isolde's arms. Not because the Alpha pulled her. Because she chose to. Isolde held her carefully at first, then tighter, when Aelira melted against her. The wedding gown pressed between them. Silk and vows. Aelira closed her eyes. Everything will be harder now. Will it not? Yes, Isolde said, against her hair. Aelira laughed softly. You could have lied. I am trying not to begin our marriage poorly. Our marriage. The phrase still felt impossible. Isolde's arms tightened slightly. Our marriage. A knock came at the door. Nyxara's voice followed. I regret to interrupt whatever emotionally significant silence is happening in there. Aelira groaned into Isolde's shoulder. Isolde sighed. Enter. Nyxara opened the door. The feast guests are beginning to wonder if you have fled. Aelira lifted her head. Can we? No, Isolde and Nyxara said together. Aelira sighed. Unfortunate. Nyxara held up a folded paper. Maravan had copies. Alicia did write to the conclave. Isolde's expression hardened. Aelira reached for the paper. Nyxara handed it to her without hesitation. Aelira noticed Isolde notice. Good. The letter was exactly as Maravan described. Elegant, concerned, poisonous. Aelira read it twice, then looked at Isolde. We answer tonight. Isolde's brows lifted. We? Yes. Nyxara smiled slowly. Oh, I like her. Isolde ignored that. What do you propose? Aelira looked at the letter again. Alicia says I was coerced because I was vulnerable, employed in your household, and elevated without counsel. Yes. So we make the truth impossible to ignore. How? Aelira folded the letter. Invite the High Priestess, the Archivist, Brevel, Elowin, Sorin, and Captain Nyxara to witness a written statement from me. Not a defensive one, declaration. Isolde's eyes sharpened. Aelira continued, I will state that I accepted freely. I will also state the conditions under which I accepted. Nyxara leaned against the doorframe. The reforms. Yes, Isolde. Watched her with growing understanding. Aelira felt the shape of it forming, thread by thread. The conclave wants to review my recognition on grounds of coercion. Let them read that my acceptance required protections for working women in keep, investigation of abuse, and legal education before I take counsel, voice. Let them object publicly to those conditions. Aelira's smile widened, sharp. Isolde looked almost awed. Aelira lifted one shoulder. I understand seams. If they pull one thread, we make sure the whole garment opens. Nyxara laughed. Isolde did not. She stepped closer and took Aelira's face in both hands. Aelira blinked. What? Isolde kissed her forehead, then released her. Aelira stared, stunned. The Alpha said, I love your mind. Aelira forgot a political thought she had ever had. Nyxara looked at the ceiling. This marriage may actually save us all, provided the two of you survive flirting. The declaration was written before midnight. The feast resumed. Toasts were given. Aelira danced once with Isolde and stepped on her boot twice. Isolde claimed not to notice, which was obviously a lie. Lady Ravel agreed to tutor Aelira on a trial basis after reading the declaration and laughing. For nearly a full minute, Lady Alicia retired early with a headache. No one believed it was only a headache. At midnight, the High Priestess, Lavara the Archivist, Captain Nyxara, Ravel, Elowin, and Sorin witnessed Aelira's signed statement. Aelira wrote her name slowly. Aelira Veyrath. Her hand shook on the second word. Isolde stood beside her, saying nothing, letting her have the moment. When the ink dried, Lavara sanded the page and pressed the ducal record seal beneath it. So entered, the archivist said. It was done. Not all of it, not even close. Something. Later, when the keep finally quieted and the moon rose high over Frostmere, Isolde brought Aelira to the ducal suite. Their suite. Aelira stopped in the doorway. Isolde noticed. You do not have to stay here tonight. Aelira looked inside. The rooms were not what she expected, grand than the receiving chambers. Warmer. Shelves full of books, a large hearth, a table covered in maps, a window seat lined with dark cushions, a vase holding 3 pine branches and 1 white moth orchid. Aelira walked to the orchid. When did you put this here, this morning? You had time? No, Aelira smiled. The bedchamber beyond was shadowed, firelit, intimidating, only because Aelira's imagination suddenly became extremely loud. Isolde remained by the door. Aelira. I know. You can have the western rooms as long as you wish. Or separate rooms here. Or I can leave. Aelira turned. Alpha. Looked composed to anyone who did not know her. Aelira knew her a little now. Enough to see the tension in her hands. Enough to hear the restraint beneath every breath. She walked back to Isolde. I do not want you to leave. Isolde's eyes darkened. But I am tired. Then we sleep. And overwhelmed. Then we sleep apart if you prefer. And happy. Isolde went still. Aelira's eyes filled unexpectedly. I'm afraid to say that too loudly. Isolde stepped closer, then whisper it. Aelira laughed through the tears. I am happy. The Alpha's face softened. Aelira touched Isolde's sleeve. And I would like to sleep beside my wife. Wife. Isolde closed her eyes. Aelira leaned forward and kissed the corner of her mouth. Is that all right? Isolde opened her eyes. The look in them warmed Aelira from throat to fingertips. Yes. Getting out of the wedding gown took 23 buttons, 2 failed attempts not to laugh, and 1 moment where Isolde had to turn away because Aelira's bare shoulder appeared and the Alpha's restraint visibly suffered. Aelira enjoyed that more than she should have. When the gown finally hung safely over a chair, Aelira stood in a soft nightdress someone had laid out for her and ran her fingers over the sleeve embroidery one last time. I thought this dress was the cruelest thing I had ever made. Isolde stood behind her. What is it now? Aelira thought about it. A witness. The Alpha nodded. Yes. Aelira turned. Will they ever stop saying I do not belong? No. The honesty hurt less than a lie would have, Isolde continued. But one day, Their daughters will pretend they always knew you did. Aelira smiled faintly. That is cynical. That is politics. And what do you believe? Isolde looked at the gown, then at Aelira. I believe belonging is not granted by those guarding the door. Sometimes it is sown in secret, carried through humiliation and worn anyway. Aelira's heart ached. You are getting better at comforting. I had a good tutor. Aelira stepped into her arms. This time, Isolde held her without hesitation. Aelira pressed her cheek to the Alpha's chest and listened to her heartbeat. Strong, steady, real. Tomorrow will be difficult, Aelira whispered. Yes, and the day after. Yes, and probably every day for a while. Likely. Aelira sighed. You are terrible at lying. I know. Aelira lifted her head. Good. Isolde looked down at her. The firelight moved across her face, softening every severe line. Aelira touched the scar near her brow. The Alpha stilled beneath her fingers. Does this hurt? Not anymore. Aelira traced it gently, and this touched the place over Isolde's heart. Isolde's breath caught. Sometimes. Aelira leaned up and kissed her. Slowly. No witnesses. No chapel. No council. No old rite. Only them. When they parted, Isolde rested her forehead against hers. Aelira Veyrath, she whispered. Aelira smiled. It still sounded impossible. It still sounded like a gown she had not known she was making for herself. Yes? Isolde's voice roughened. Very glad you cursed at the hem. Aelira burst out laughing. The sound filled the room, bright and startled and free. Isolde smiled against her temple. Outside, snow began to fall again over Frostmere Keep. It covered the chapel steps, the courtyard stones, sealed rooms where old cruelties waited to be judged. The servant paths where new rumors bloomed, and the high windows of the ducal suite where an Omega Seamstress slept beside the most feared Alpha in the north. By morning, there would be letters, arguments, council sessions, threats disguised as concern, lessons, laws, mistakes, apologies not yet earned, forgiveness not yet given, a whole future waiting with teeth. But for that night, Aelira rested. Not because the world had become gentle, because she had, because beside her, Isolde kept watch until sleep finally took her too, one hand resting open between them. Not gripping, not claiming, waiting. Even in dreams, Aelira found it and held on.